Sometimes to truly make a change, you have to do something big, something dramatic, and something that ensures that you never go back to the emotional and physical traps that have made you so unhappy. One of the best days of my life was the day I smashed my scale. I loved it so much, I think we should all do it. And to make rejecting diet culture even more exciting, I'm giving away free advice and prizes, including a full year of body kindness coaching with me. So to join, visit bodykindnessbook.com/BK Scale Smash. That's bodykindnessbook.com/BK Scale Smash. There you give your name and email and you'll get the motivational coaching from me. Lots of ideas for how you can participate right there on the page. And I look forward to joining you all summer long while we work together to just tell the world that we don't need scales, we don't need judgment, we don't need criticism. What we need is body kindness. Hey listeners, before we get into today's podcast, I wanted to jump on and share some notes. So for the first time, I am actually doing a podcast with two guests at once, and it was really fun. And who knows, maybe I'll do it again in the future. One of my guests is Glenys Oyston. She's a fellow Health at Every Size, registered dietitian, and former chronic dieter. And then I also have Sarah Vance on the line, and she is a body image coach. And interestingly, she has a past experience in figure competitions and bodybuilding, which also is associated with, as I'm sure you could imagine, lots of chronic dieting and deprivation, and she dealt with binge eating as well. So between the three of us, we really represent this motley crew, if you will, of women, and we know we're not alone, but who have dealt with dieting and body image issues for a long time. Thank you, diet culture. But who also have come around to find roles where we can help people create a better life and break free from dieting. So it was very exciting to all get together and have this conversation that I've been wanting to have for a while. And I really just think that this is the jumping off point for a series of podcasts where I try to delve at this topic in different areas. And it's really this idea of framing and mindset. So I started off with comparing the fitness industry, right? And we see these fitness professionals finally getting recognition in larger bodies. And I'm thinking specifically of people like Jessamine Stanley or Louise Green, who have books and fans, and they're considered experts. And you see these women in larger bodies doing physical activities, and it's not necessarily presented, oh, congratulations, you're trying to get your body in shape. And I think this is a very important progression that needs to happen, because we need to be able to reframe fitness to mean things other than changing our appearance and, getting finally bikini ready or whatever it is. The reality of it is we all have different personal reasons for why we would engage in physical activity. And there are many, many reasons to do so way outside of appearance. And if anything, physical activity alone, it increases your hunger. So anyone who does exercise as a weight loss tool, we know overall that weight loss in the long run is ineffective. And part of the reason why is when you get exercise, you get hungrier. Your body defends a set point. So I bring that up because what I want to try to get into are these conversations around, but then let's take a look at food and nutrition. And very much so, we can't talk about food and eating in this country unless it's one of two extremes. It's either crazy dieting and Whole30. The philosophy of every bite of food you put into your mouth either adds to your health or takes away from your health. That is just such diet BS. It is so not true. And yet they have so many followers. It is hard to find someone who's not into Whole30. Even I saw Brene Brown was doing it for a little while and congratulating. And it's just like, it is so sick and pervasive. And then on the other side, it's, you devil with the unicorn drink. And so what I wanted to try to bring some conversations around is this idea of how do we really take back food and eating and to have, to not judge individual foods as good or bad, but to also feel good about our food choices. And so, we get into the whole idea of why you need no food rules, intuitive eating, why it's okay to eat emotionally. Many people come to me wanting to overcome emotional eating, and they have weight concerns. The hope is if I beat emotional eating, then I'll lose weight. And we have to work to disentangle all that. And really, I still identify as an emotional eater. I don't believe that you ever overcome emotional eating, but emotional eating is part of normal eating. That's all one big giant reframe for the idea of that we don't need to judge individual foods as good or bad, individual behaviors, that it is really about our patterns and our patterns feeling good. So, all of this in the context of body kindness, I just want to give you a reminder. Hopefully you're reading the book, but nobody can tell you what body kindness is or isn't. You are the expert in your body, and you decide each day, moment, week, what feels good, in an intuitive sense. I'm enjoying the taste of this apple. So when that thought comes in, and that inner critic, that Ms. Perfectionist that sort of is trying to act like your best friend is like, oh, good for you. You chose the fruit instead of the ice cream. Like, be careful of that. That's not your friendly voice. Try to break apart that virtue and say, you know what? I really like apples. It's refreshing. And today I'm doing an apple with peanut butter, and that's nice. So, we can start to reframe our food choices away from, this individual food is going to heal me or is going to help me lose weight, or I'm being a good girl because I'm eating this food. Or on the opposite side, this individual food is going to hurt me and I'm being a terrible person for tasting this or trying to take pleasure in it. We don't want any of those extremes. And everyone's individual journey is going to look a little bit different. We're all going to be at different places, and we're all going to find a different way out of diet culture and away from dieting. So what I really hope you get out of this podcast is an understanding that we're letting go of the rules, that we really need to, work on ourselves as individuals and think about what we really want, what habits we would like to cultivate and why. And when we can get clear on that and really make peace with food and our bodies, and one doesn't necessarily come before the other. Lots of people still struggle with their body image, but it's less severe. And also they don't want to let it get in the way of them enjoying a really good life. So let yourself be exactly where you need to be. It's A-okay, but really think about this idea of food and its virtue and the role it plays in your life. And you'll hear us talk about, how we think that whole idea of, quote, healthy eating has really ruined everything about health and well-being. And we just have the wrong idea that every choice we make is going to make a magnificent impact. I mean, our behavioral patterns can make a difference in our health and well-being and in our quality of life. But genetics plays a role. There's so many other factors, and really all this anxiety around food is not really good for us. So hopefully this is one conversation of many where we really start to tackle this idea of how can we best for ourselves reframe food. And instead of judging this is healthy and this is not healthy and this is good and this is bad, to feel like we are taking care of ourselves in the big picture. And that if other people are engaging in, food policing talk, that we don't have to be part of that. Just take a deep breath and know that you're on your right track and make peace, walk away, exhale, all that good stuff that really just takes care of you, and let yourself be where you need to be and let other people be where they are. But just knowing that you can work through a process where you reframe the purpose and why you're making your food choices so that, you don't have to feel like you're abandoning body positivity or you're doing body kindness wrong if you eat a cookie and enjoy it, darn it. Like I'd say, woo, that is totally body kindness. But that also if you eat a really nice, tasty salad that was yummy, that that thought that comes in your head that says, oh yeah, you're being good and good for you. You can just notice that thought, but just choose not to engage with it and work on that reframe. Other reasons why you are working on feeling good about the way you're eating. There's so many reasons, energy, and yes, even without getting too technical, different vitamins and minerals that help you, fight colds. Like, you can come up with simple reasons without getting in every little detail. But I think when you do that work for yourself, you start to see that voice change in your mind. And, body kindness is really about cultivating that inner caregiver voice. And a caregiver definitely does not judge food choices. A caregiver is compassionate and kind and follows preferences. And, sometimes you eat a little too much of something that was yummy, and that thought might come in about calories or weight gain, and you can notice that thought and just simply not do anything. That's the beauty of the human body. If we work toward body trust, our appetites self-regulate. So any amount of that, whoops, I'm having these thoughts that I ate too much of something, just digest, rest and digest. Your body will talk to you and it will tell you when it's hungry and needs nourishment again. So I know it's a process. We dive into this conversation about how icky and muddy these waters are, because of course, as a person who cares about your well-being, vegetables and fruits and beans and nuts and seeds, like these types of foods that we see on all these diet plans, those foods are going to come into play. There are benefits to eating well that have nothing at all to do with weight loss. So I hope to bring more of that information to you over the next several months and the next year, because I think that that's a key component of combating diet culture, is to understand the power of a reframe, and that you can opt out of diet culture and find a way of eating that works for you and you alone. And it's not about conforming to somebody else's patterns, because people can be in two very different places based on different past experiences and based on a different understanding for what they need right now. So with that, I'm gonna tune you in to our next podcast show. And thanks for listening. Because real health is about being good to yourself. It's time for Body Kindness, the place where all bodies fit and weight is just a number. Hi, I'm Rebecca Scritchfield, author of the book Body Kindness, registered dietitian, nutritionist, and host of this podcast. Today, we are going to talk about the intersections of, quote, healthy eating and body positivity and fat acceptance. And this topic is important to Body Kindness because the reality of it is, when you leave diet culture and you commit to no longer dieting, a lot of today's diets are in disguise. So things like Whole30 and Paleo, and it can be very confusing for a non-dieter because it can look a lot like healthy eating. And then there's that other question of, well, if I'm no longer part of diet culture, but I also care about nourishing my body and eating well, it feels like a diet. And frankly, you can get very confused, and you have folks who feel like they're rejecting body positivity or fat activism if they are also working on healthier eating habits, because the world thinks they're doing it for weight loss. So it's a whole mickety muck of mess. And so I have some wonderful, inspiring, friends, professionals, and fellow ladies on the chat today. So I'm first going to introduce Glenys Oyston. She is a registered dietitian and eating coach who dares women to stop dieting and start living. As someone who struggled with her weight and feeling out of control around food for years, she knows exactly what others are going through and how to get them to food freedom. She coaches people in person in her Los Angeles office, online, or by phone through one-on-one and group coaching programs. Welcome to the show, Glenys.
Hey, Rebecca. Thanks so much for having me on.
I'm so excited to chat with you, but first I want to introduce the other guest. We have Sarah Vance. Sarah Vance is a body image and self-worth coach, host of the Reclaiming You podcast, and creator of the life-changing Breaking Boundaries program. She specializes in helping women all over the world let go of the diet dogma, body hate, perfection and all or nothing thinking so they can live their damn lives feeling worthy, confident, loved, free, and enough in whatever body they have. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you for having me. Hey, everybody.
This is going to be fun. I'm all tickled reading the bios. I'm ready to dive in. So let's kind of paint the story. I really feel like this came about. I posted something on Instagram, and Sarah, I think you saw it and you're like, yes, 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 exclamation. Do you remember what it was?
I have no idea. I forget what it is actually that you posted. Was it you that posted it, or was it on somebody else's page and you commented? I have no idea. I don't remember.
Maybe. I wonder if it was after I had Jess Baker on the show, but I know it was definitely, or like, because I was also kind of sharing like these concerns around, you know, we're seeing examples of people in different size bodies, and in particular, seeing more representation of people in larger bodies, promoting and encouraging physical fitness and physical activity, like without it being dieting, without it being weight loss focused. And I was like, can we do this around food and nutrition? Because every time you talk about it, it seems like a diet. And so I know it was in that ballpark of like how these intersections can be very challenging and confusing. And we basically agreed that there's a lot of like, a lot to unpack around the whole idea around nourishing yourself and taking care of your body, but it feeling like a diet and what to do. So,
yeah, I mean, it is, like you said earlier, when you first started talking about the topic, it is a muddy topic, especially when you're coming from diet culture, because it gets really muddy. It's complicated. And that's why we need to have a conversation about it, because some people are going to want to learn how to nourish their body, but we also need to expand the idea of how and what nourishing is, because we can expand that. We could expand the idea of health. We can ditch the traditional ideas of all that stuff. So it is a messy conversation to have, for sure.
Yeah, messy and important, right? Because it's like, I think this is another area where we could go all or nothing, right? Like what your feeling of being on a diet feels like, it does vary among people. And I know in my practice, I've seen people where it's like, I can't even talk about meal planning, even if it's keeping me organized to grocery shop, because it just reminds me of all the planning I had to do around diets. And so, you know, it can be highly individual. But then I think when you're sharing stuff on social media, or you happen to be, you know, I mean, social media is like designed for sharing what's going on in your personal life. It's like the ritualistic of food being a moral issue. It's like, ooh, better not post me eating the apple because somebody will think I've, you know, dropped body positivity and now I'm trying to lose weight. Like, what do you think, Glenys?
Yeah, it's sort of like this. It's become this problem of we have assigned this moral thing around health. It's become this moral obligation to pursue health. And it's literally ruining everything. It's sort of like you said, people don't want to plan to get themselves fed because it feels like it's a diet. And it's probably because they've been on a diet where they've had to plan, you know, their lives within an inch of
Got to eat that cottage cheese at 11 a.m.
Yeah, right, exactly. And then, you know, the reality is if we're going to get ourselves fed, there is some planning required. So it's almost like dieting is sort of ruining health. And yet that's what we're sort of saying that is required. We have to eat for health. And then it also narrows this discussion of what health is down to food. And that's ridiculous because that's one of the smallest parts of what health is. So I think the first thing we have to do is like remove this moral obligation to be healthy or to pursue health before we can sort of start thinking about health again.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's a good point. Like for stuff we share on social media, if we're posting food pictures, right? Like we've got to understand that, you know, most people are looking at that and comparing up and are trying to be like they're in the healthy competition, right? I'm trying to be healthier than you or as healthy as you. And if they're not, then they're going to feel that sense of despair, or that sense of inadequacy that, you know, is not inspirational. And, you know, I mean, I tend to shy away. I mean, I'm laughing at this because I know I posted this dates dipped in peanut butter, which was really delicious. I was like, oh, quick Instagram of a snack. But it's just like, I tend to shy away from that because of food being sized up as to, you're good because you ate this good thing and you're bad because you ate this bad thing. Sarah, what have you kind of noticed in these sort of intersections from where you stand in working with body image and fitness and stuff?
Well, I think whenever you have morality wrapped up into something, it of course goes back to your own self-worth. So we have this idea that we are more of a worthy human being if we are quote unquote healthy, or we're reaching or trying to attain or performing health, which really isn't the case, because all bodies are worthy regardless. So that's where I see it specifically with body image issues and self-worth problems, is when we think that our worthiness is on the basis of what we're putting in our mouth or how actively we are engaged in performing health, when it isn't the case. If you really look at that, that's kind of a load of crap, because not all people can uphold or perform the narrow standard of health that we see in society. So what are we saying to those individuals? That they're not worthy, that they're not deserving of respect, compassion, and kindness? That's completely bogus. But that's what so many of us do to ourselves. And we have our worthiness be hinged on how actively we are with participating in quote unquote healthy behaviors. It's a very big problem. But I think the biggest thing is to normalize and neutralize. You have to normalize everything and really know that you are enough as you are first before you can even kind of consider talking about some of these topics. I think it's kind of not a process, but it is a process that you have to kind of go through of unlearning before you can even consider thinking about some of these other topics.
Yeah. Well, and then it also intersects with what we get from the media, right? Because, right, it's like sugar is a toxic poison. I mean, or the unicorn thing from this year. I mean, people went nuts over a drink. Like, it was no big deal. It was a drink. Like it or not, it was just a beverage. Glenys, what did you notice about the unicorn drink debacle?
Oh my God, that unicorn frappuccino thing was crazy, because first of all, I don't go to Starbucks regularly. I don't drink coffee just for like, it doesn't make me feel good. So not for any moral reason. I feel like I have to state that. But I started seeing it show up, and I was like, ooh, unicorn frappuccino. That sounds fun. What's that? And then everybody's just losing their shit about like, oh my God. Now, of course, I am not in those circles. My circle on social media is very anti-diet, body positive. So people are showing up in my group and saying like, are you seeing this? This is good. People are going crazy. And then it was sort of like, ooh, I tasted it. Hee hee. And then it was like an honest discussion of, did you like it or didn't you like it? You know, instead of like, oh my God, did you see how many carbs are in it? And people were actually traumatized by other people that they'd seen on social media posting the nutrition facts. They're like, I don't want to see that. I just want to taste it and try it and have some fun, because it's a fun thing, right? Like nobody's pretending that the unicorn frappuccino is a health food, right? It's like fun. And
I could make a food group for it if I tried.
Right. The unicorn food group, which is the food group of foods that disappear after a few days, because it turns out it was just a promotion, right? Yeah. Which is, now I understand why they called it a unicorn. Like, oh, it disappeared. Did it even exist? Which is, I think, how we're all pretending how it is now. It's like, oh, we don't even talk about the unicorn frappuccino anymore because it's gone. But yeah, it was just like, it really showed, it was a barometer for how insane people are around food right now. Yeah. Like that, this obviously is a desserty type thing, right? Like, are we really thinking about the calories that are in a dessert? And unfortunately, the answer is yes. And so this ruins food for everybody. But it also just showed that, everybody still had this sort of, if you eat this, you're kind of a bad person.
Yeah. Well, so a couple of things about what I saw it on social media. One thing I noticed, because you mentioned about how it was triggering for other people to see the calories listed with it. Somebody else noticed that they actually posted, I want to say, either the small or medium size of the drink with the calories from the largest size you could order. So they were even like lying to people in a way, right? Misleading by posting the calorie information for the largest possible portion you could make and putting it next to something that looks small. It's like, that's misleading. And then the person who shared that, for me, it was a good barometer of like, and I'm unfriending you, and I'm unfriending you. because she called it a cancer and diabetes bomb, and that she couldn't believe that anybody in the world would ever drink this. And I'm like, well, first of all, that's very ableist language, kind of.
Was she selling anything? Because that's what I've noticed. Like, what multi-level marketing program are you then selling? Because that's what I noticed the most.
Oh gosh. That is a whole other like crazy, like it works or whatever. No, it doesn't. It is a diet. Yeah. So I don't know. So I guess let's kind of transition into, okay, we all obviously agree, right? We've done our own work, our own liberation from diet culture. We help people find their own freedom. But we also work with people who really find this really difficult, right? To separate themselves and to reframe, right, what it means to eat well, or, and maybe even that term is difficult for people, but it's like, it is not, I think noticing it's not an easy transition because of what's going on in our minds to go from, dieting and food rules and, good person because I ate this one specific thing and, food avoidance of other things. It's not easy to go from that to more flexibility and more freedom and liberation. Sarah, what is it that you think is most helpful when somebody is just starting to say, okay, I don't want to totally let go of eating healthy food, whether there's fear wrapped up in that or not. They don't totally want to let go of that, but they do want to let go of dieting. What would you just say to somebody who's in that boat?
It obviously changes by each individual, but the biggest thing for me is that what I have found what works with my clients and within myself as well is letting go of all those rules completely and letting it go completely, because who really defines health? Like, even when it comes to healthy food, who actually defines that? I think that's something that we all have to kind of look within ourselves and do our own work to really redefine that or define it for ourselves. Because, okay, if we're talking about the unicorn frappuccino, who actually says that is quote unquote unhealthy for me? Who gets to define that for me, myself, and I? I don't endorse or promote that idea. And I sure as hell don't want somebody to define that for myself, because I am a whole human being and I get to make those decisions for myself. And who is here to tell us that just because something may not be physically nourishing to us, that what if it's mentally or socially or spiritually nourishing for us? So when I think about the concept of health, I really do gray out the entire component of it, where we're not just looking at it from a physical component, but we're looking at it from mental, social, all of that, because again, it comes back to who actually defines health. I really have individuals do their own introspection work and be curious about what pops up for them with where they're defining this stuff, because you have to define it for yourself. I mean, nobody gets to make these rules. And if we're living by somebody else's rules, then that's just buying into diet culture. On top of that, if we're going to be approaching anything, it could be quote unquote a kale salad. If we're going to be approaching a kale salad with an unhealthy mindset, then my question always comes back to, is that actually healthy? Mm-hmm. Is it actually healthy? If your mindset is wrapped up into anxiety, disorder, fear, punishment, is that really healthy? Then it's so interesting to kind of like really look at this big topic here. But my biggest thing that I always tell people is to let go of all the rules completely, especially in the beginning, because I think we need to go through the process of really normalizing all foods. Mm-hmm. And when you can see food as just food, and one is not higher than the other or lower than the other, and that even comes to the process of health, when you can just see it as this is just food, this is what it is, then further on down the road, the further you get away and outside of diet culture, then you can start having those decisions and choices based on what feels good for your body or how you actually want to nourish it. But in the beginning, it definitely is surrendering to the idea of control and of even health.
Yeah. Glenys, how do you help people become more flexible with food in your work?
Yeah, I loved what Sarah said about just forgetting all the rules, because I really follow that as well. You know, people are usually coming to me. They've been dieters for a long time. They've really had their heads messed with around eating and weight. And so the first thing I want people to do is sort of like, let's forget any notions of healthy. And I really reject this idea of healthy eating anyway. Like, what is that? You know, we became so nutrient focused way back in the 70s, or probably even maybe before that, but when we started to demonize fat, and it's like, oh, anything with fat in it is unhealthy. Like that was the way people started to think about food. And now it's anything with sugar in it is unhealthy. And this is ridiculous. There's like zero evidence to show that these foods are inherently unhealthy for you. And all the evidence that, you know, we can look at, if you look at, you know, Ellen Satter's eating competence model and all of the information around intuitive eating, the studies around that, is that what we're finding is people are healthier when they have a sort of a normal relationship to food, where they're honoring body cues and listening and honoring pleasure and all of that. And that it kind of doesn't really matter as much what you're eating, as long as you sort of are connecting your body to, you know, your mind when you're eating. Yeah. And so I really try to get people to reject this notion of what is a healthy food and what isn't a healthy food. Because really, if you're only ever eating broccoli and that's it, you know, you would look at broccoli, ooh, that's a healthy food. If you're only eating that, you're going to be deficient in so many nutrients. So it's you can't just look at a nutrient and say, oh, I'll just eat that and I'll be healthy. It's the whole picture. It's the whole relationship. And again, you know, I just want to stress, like, eating is such a small part of health. I've got people that come to me and like, oh, I'm exhausted and I'm burned out and I'm stressed out. And it's like, well, what you eat or how you eat is not necessarily going to fix those problems. Like, there are some other things going on that need to be addressed. And I think food is this huge distraction away from all of those other things that need addressing too. So I kind of try to pull the lens back a little bit and give it a bigger picture of like, here's your health in a much larger frame. You know, it's not just these things that you're eating. So, and it's hard to get people to refocus, but I think also they're also glad to do it, because the rules of dieting and eating healthy are so exhausting and depressing.
Yeah. Well, you know, I think the thing we just bang people over the head with over and again whether it's social media or article headlines or anywhere, it's this idea of like, you're going to die soon unless you eat a green smoothie. Or, you know, it's literally this idea of this is the thing that helps you hold on, you know, like almost a fear, right? Of if you don't do this, you're going to get a disease. And not even that, but frankly, you're going to gain weight, you know, because we don't, in our culture, accept and respect bodies of all sizes and even individuals' choice to not engage in healthy behaviors, right? You know, like that's an individual's personal choice, but our whole push is fear. And so people end up making these choices believing that they're warding off illness, that they are, you know, really taking care of their bodies. And a lot of these plans are restrictive, at the very least a waste of time, but they get in the way in some point of your social life, or what's going to influence when you sit down to a restaurant and the first thing you think about is what's the healthiest thing on the menu I could get, or what's the good girl thing to do. It's like, is that really the kind of life you want to live, where health and nutrition every single time guide your decisions? I think that's a very fear-based way of living, because you're just desperately kind of conforming to this diet culture that says, if you don't do this, something bad is going to happen to you.
Yeah, I mean, it has become, you know, I think it was Jess Baker in her book. She's the one that started talking about, you know, health and healthism is the new beauty myth, because it is very much the reality of the situation that we're seeing now. Because what's the thing that people say all the time? Well, you can be whatever size, ... as long as you're healthy. So it's one of those things where now it's not even in relation to body. I mean, there is definitely a correlation. People are tying health and size together still. That's a very big problem, which is just a myth. But even within body positive spaces, we still have this idea of, well, okay, but you're going too far because you just need to be healthy. You need to make sure that you're healthy. So we have this idea of health, and we have this idea that it's within our control, completely within our control. And it really isn't. I think it's like less than 20% of what encompasses all of our health is actually something that we could even attempt to manipulate. Yeah, it's ridiculous. So
it's like 18% is quote lifestyle choices.
Exactly. So it's like, 18% out of 100 is nothing. And how much brain power and emotions and money and time are we actually spending on something when we could do a lot more work in this world with something else?
Mm-hmm. Glenys, so when you are working with people in like this food flexibility and everything, so do you like tell them just eat whatever you want, whenever you want, as long as you're hungry? Or can they engage in non-hunger eating? Or what if they're like feeling really emotional and their pattern is to like kind of check out and say screw it and engage in screw it eating? Like, what would you do in those scenarios?
Yeah, I mean, I get really individual when I'm talking to people, and of course, I have like no rules around like you can't eat if you're not hungry, because that's a diet too. So I try to have no rules except for, maybe try to enjoy your food. And even that's like, you know what? The reality is everything we eat, we're not going to enjoy. So what I really try to foster is a curiosity around what is happening for them when they're eating, and to be sort of like Tribbley and Resch talk about an intuitive eating, sort of being this food anthropologist. And it's really to get them to do a lot of exploration around their motivations about when they're eating, what's going on, and what it is that they feel is wrong with it. And then talking about if that is really something that's wrong, or if it's something that they've internalized this message that it's wrong. And so, yeah, I start in different places for everybody, but I really just start to get people to, again, let go of those rules, and then just start to, a place I like to start is to get them to focus on just tasting food and seeing if they are enjoying what they're eating, and seeing the feelings that come up and talk about why those feelings are sort of coming up. And then, talk about self-talk, where they are going to give themselves new messages about how this food isn't bad and harming them. And so, yeah, I mean, I start in a lot of different places just depending on who I'm talking to. But the overriding message for me is like, let's let go of the food rules right now and just start to tune in to your body.
Yeah, exactly. It has the information. We kind of checked it out when we started doing all the diety stuff.
Yeah,
Sarah,
absolutely.
for you, if someone's actively struggling with emotional eating and are working with you, how do you try to help guide them?
Well, I try to really hone in on the fact that you're allowed to emotionally eat. I think there is this idea.
It works. Surprise.
Yeah, I think that there is this idea that we have to resist emotional eating, and that is the same mentality of avoidance and restriction, and using curiosity of, okay, what's really going on with me if you do notice that you're emotional eating, but also noticing that, yeah, you're a human being and sometimes you're going to emotionally eat. What is the problem is when we attach morality to it, when we attack ourselves and we say that we're a failure and we're disgusting and we're horrible, because that actually perpetuates the cycle. And then we go into the cycle of, well, F it, I already quote unquote did something wrong, so now I'm just going to continue. That's what perpetuates the cycle. So if we actually give ourselves permission to emotionally eat in those moments and use curiosity along with it to see, okay, what's going on with me? Okay, this is what's going on, and accept that, yeah, okay, right now I'm going to emotionally eat. I understand that this isn't going to fix the issue that's going on. What are some other ways that I can soothe myself? Because the reality is that emotional eating is a way of self-soothing in a situation in which you need coping. And if you are in a situation in which you need coping, and that's your go-to coping mechanism, you're going to turn to that until you have other coping mechanisms in place. That isn't saying that emotional eating is bad, because it's not. It's inherently neutral, and we all do it because we're all human beings. It's when we think that we've done something wrong. So the biggest thing that I tell the people that I work with is to give yourself permission to emotionally eat, because if we don't, then we go into that self-blame that I'm a failure. It's when guilt and shame starts to come into it. And guilt and shame are huge, huge factors in the whole diet cycle when we really look at it. And when the whole point of ridding ourselves of diet culture is to get rid of guilt and shame completely. So unconditional permission, and that includes emotional eating, is where I always tell my clients, and then continue, like Glenys said, with the curiosity to see what's really going on with me. But even then, noticing, yeah, I'm emotional eating and this is what it is, and I'm going to move on with my life accordingly.
Yeah. No, I mean, I agree with you both wholeheartedly. Like as a foundation, it's so much less important about what it is you're eating and more about like that, just that space that you need, right? Like this space where you can actually think rationally and observe without judgment of and just noticing, okay, I'm not hungry and I'm reaching for this. Can I enjoy it? What else is going on? And that it's with that curiosity that you bring about self-awareness, and, you can't even begin to change without having a sense of awareness, right? Because we've all had those clients who, on the one hand, they feel completely exhausted by emotional eating behaviors, right? And on the other hand, they're exhausted by dieting. And on the other hand, they're like, I don't know what to do, right? And it's kind of like, we know bodies need nourished, and I'm not talking, healthifying that with half plate veggies. We know bodies need energy and they need nourished, whether it's brownies or the apple, and that the dieting and the rules actually set you up for, wanting to rebel, right? Because you just don't have access to those types of foods. But beyond anything else, if, while you're trying to find your new non-dieting version of yourself, being willing to feel whatever you need to feel in that moment, because the way you're going to eventually overcome emotional eating is to really have a deeper connection with who you are and what is influencing the choices you're making.
Yeah. See, I also think that the idea of overcoming emotional eating, I know what you mean, but the idea of just overcoming emotional eating for me has the idea that it's something that we need to fix. And it's something. Yeah. And so that's not something that I personally use with my clients, because I really try to instill in them that no eating, no matter what you're doing, is inherently good or bad. It's just food. But obviously, understanding and feeling your emotions is definitely a huge component of all of this, because people use food, whether they're restricting as a means of emotional coping mechanisms or eating out of emotional coping mechanisms. So you can see both sides of it, where people actually diet because of emotional discomfort, or where they eat because of emotional discomfort. So yes, of course, feeling the plethora of emotions, whatever may happen, come up, is extremely important, and having awareness about that, because for so many people, we've been using dieting or eating as a means of numbness, distraction, or whatever it might be, when we really just need to start feeling our emotions. Mm-hmm. But I still, me personally, practice under the idea that it's okay to emotionally eat, because we're all human beings and nobody's perfect. And sometimes that's going to happen in life. And as long as we can remain compassionate towards ourselves and realize that it's just food, then we can move on to the concept of actually feeling the emotions and seeing what we can do in our lives to really, if there's anything that we need to fix the situation that's actually causing the emotional discomfort in the first place.
Right. Exactly. I agree with you 100%. Glenys, what else do you think, whether it's individual or, as dietitians or culturally, just what are some of your other thoughts on this issue?
Yeah, my thought I was having was that I don't think we would even be having a discussion about health, to be honest, if there wasn't anti-fat phobia or fat phobia and anti-fat bias. That's the reality. And I was sort of thinking back to when I went on my first diet, and I was like 22, and nobody gave a crap about health back then. And we were all just dieting to lose weight. And somewhere in the early 2000s, it switched. It was almost like it was maybe that the realization that dieting wasn't working for most people, and that maybe vanity was not the best motivation. So now they sort of turned it into a health health imperative. And the reality is like it has nothing to do with health, because you can be healthy at any size, and we know that, or at least you can work towards health at any size. But the fact that fat phobia exists, I think, is the motivator for even why we have to have this conversation, because it's sort of like Sarah was saying, like, it's okay if you're fat as long as you're healthy. But then who judges you after that? And the reality is, that like people will just turn around and say, well, no, you can't be healthy because you're fat. So it's this ridiculous.
It's more oppression.
Thing.
Yeah. It's more oppression. And as a dietitian, I know we would agree, and we have a few others in our circle who would agree, that we really do need to be promoting size diversity, and even in the context of, but we're health professionals. Yes. And so if you really care about health and well-being, you care about whole health, mind, body, and you have to support body liberation. And so that means that if you really do care about health and well-being, working on your own internalized stigma, and also promoting the movement for body acceptance, fat positivity, being willing to call yourself a fat positive dietitian. Like, that's hard for dietitians.
Yeah, it's really hard, because for a long time we've just had this idea, of course, and it's perpetuated in our programs. And you and I talked about this when you were on our podcast, that there's only sort of one way to think about it, and that's weight loss driven. So that if we can start, like you said, calling ourselves fat positive, because the reality is that weight stigma contributes so much to poor health, so much more than I think quote unquote unhealthy eating, or even a poor relationship to food. Like, if you're going around thinking that you are seen as unacceptable by society, what is that doing to your body and to your stress levels and to everything, and we know that the studies that are coming out now are showing that weight stigma is this huge negative impact on health. And so if we could just start saying, well, health is for, pursuing health is for everybody, and it doesn't matter what your body size is, and it doesn't matter what your body size ends up, I think we would be doing better by so many more people.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Sarah, a final word from you on if people are getting wrapped up in confusion around, I want to feel good and I want to feel good about my food choices, that you would say this is the one thing you need to get clear on if you're really going to have a healthy body image, and just a better life that is free from diets.
Well, I think it goes back to one of the first things that we said, which I believe is unconditional permission to eat food, period. And then I think once you have that in place and you let go of the morality and you really do some internal work to really look at your internalized fat phobia, because that's really what the basis of a lot of this stuff is, because a lot of it doesn't even, when people are concerned about health, they really don't give a shit about health. The majority of individuals, when we really get down to it, we use curiosity enough, it comes down to this idea on body size, just like Glenys was saying. But undoing all of that narrative, then you can actually come to the place of nourishing your body for what you want. And that looks different for each individual. It's going to look different for me, for you and Glenys, and for the listeners that are going to be, listening to this. So the biggest thing I say is unconditional permission, first and foremost. You have to go through that phase of really seeing food as just food, and letting go of health ideals. And like putting health on the back burner so you can really just normalize and unlearn a lot of this stuff, and prioritizing your mental health. I think that's one thing that people don't do. People think that letting go of dieting is letting go of quote unquote health. But
Amen.
In reality, you are prioritizing your mental health at this point. So it's not, if anything, you're just taking a different perspective on health. And then of course, like I said, really, widening the idea of health altogether, just like Glenys was saying, which is all encompassing of who you are as a person. So health is it's messy, but it's not impossible. And you can do it from a place of compassion, respect, and kindness and body autonomy versus being wrapped up in punishment, diet culture, and internalized fat phobia.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up. So many people think, oh, well, if I let go of this dieting thing, or I'm so afraid, and it means I don't care. It's like, no, you actually are caring the most about your well-being by walking away from all that stuff. And so I'm glad you highlighted that point too. Well, before we go, can you each just tell me where listeners can go to get more information and connect with you? And I'll be sure to include all of that in the show notes.
Yeah, sure. You can find me at my website, which is daretonotdiet.com, or you can also find me at glenysoyston.com, but my name's hard to spell. So, and my business is there, and I see people in LA and online, and you can find my blog there. I've written a lot on these kinds of subjects, and also my podcast that I have as well, Dietitians Unplugged, with my podcast partner, Erin Flores.
Yes, I love that podcast. And Sarah, what about for you?
Yeah, so you can just find more of my writing and my blogs and podcast links as well on my website, sarahvance.com. And my podcast is the Reclaiming You podcast, where we cover a whole bunch of different stuff. But basically, the end premise is just helping you live your damn lives unapologetically.
I love that. Thank you guys so much for being on the chat today. I feel like we're almost like opening up this interesting can of worms, which we deal with in our work. And if it brings listeners questions, I'd rather them be questioning things and moving forward, because like we said in the beginning, it's not necessarily, pretty. It's actually quite messy, but it makes sense when you open up your eyes and see what is truly helpful and what's not helpful. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca.
And that's our show. Thank you so much for listening. I would love if you could take a minute and leave a rating and review on iTunes. I know they don't make it very easy, so I have a few quick tips for you. First, launch the Apple Podcast app, and then you're going to click the search button to enter the name Body Kindness, and you'll find my podcast. You'll see the album art. And when you click on the album art, there is going to be a button in the middle at the top. It's called Reviews. Click that, and then when you scroll to the bottom, you will see an option to leave a review. And so you'll click that button and go ahead and write your thoughts. I also would love ideas for future episodes. You can email me, Rebecca@bodykindnessbook.com. Again, that's Rebecca@bodykindnessbook.com. I love chatting about the show and how it's helpful. And so keep those emails coming. And also, if you are not yet completed with the e-course, don't forget that's a free resource for anyone who's interested in practicing body kindness. If you visit bodykindnessbook.com and click on Get Started, just enter in your name and email and you'll get instant access. I'll see you there.